You're tuned in to the Summit High School KMNT Progressive Radio's Big Question Spotlight. I'm your host, AJ Skidmore. Today's segment is going to look at the various ways in which our political establishment puts people's lives in danger. Today's big question, is it our duty to sacrifice the people for economic growth? This is the question Yakimi Takahashi was left to ponder after she lost her daughter to death by overwork, also known as Karoshi. Her daughter, Matsuri Takahashi, committed suicide due to work-related stress after months of grueling overtime shifts. Karoshi has been a legally recognized cause of death in Japan since 2015, and it claims thousands of lives per year. According to Statista, Karoshi deaths peaked in 2011 at 2,689, but have remained high with 1,949 deaths last year. The parents of these victims are finding themselves reaching the same tragic revelation Takahashi had, saying, quote, "As a mother, I could not protect her from the company." And the government did little to protect her daughter as well, as bills passed in Japanese parliament in response to Karoshi still allow up to 80 hours a month of overtime work. This overwork contributes to stress, exhaustion, and depression, all of which are factors in Karoshi deaths. The question Yakimi Takahashi had to ask herself are the same questions we're asking ourselves now in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 has claimed over 220,000 lives in the US alone, and experts agree that the best way to keep yourself and others safe is to stay home. However, this is not the message being pushed by our political establishment. Outlets like Fox News are telling people to go back to work. This is having real-world consequences. According to a study published in the Washington Post, quote, "Infection and mortality rates are higher in places where one pundit who initially downplayed the severity of the pandemic, Fox News' Sean Hannity, reaches the largest audiences." This message of go back to work is killing people. That may sound like an exaggeration, but many conservative media figures and politicians are happy to let people die to keep the economy going. When the lieutenant governor of Texas was questioned on his decision to reopen the economy, he said, quote, "There are more important things than living." This economic growth over human lives attitude is prevalent at all levels of government. President Trump spent months downplaying the risk of the virus and telling people to go back to work. Moreover, Trump's delayed reaction is largely responsible for the hundreds of thousands of deaths that we're experiencing. According to an article from Business Insider, quote, "The White House started issuing social distancing guidelines on March 16th, more than 2 weeks after the first COVID-19 related death. However, an estimated 90% of coronavirus deaths in the United States could have been avoided if social distancing had began on March 2nd, according to two health experts. This indifference to the danger that COVID-19 poses is proof of one thing: that our political establishment believes that it is indeed the duty of the people to sacrifice themselves for economic growth. COVID-19 is the American Karoshi. It's our epidemic of being compelled to work even when that work is unsafe. Like the victims of Karoshi, our essential workers are being compelled to work by power structures that prioritize profit over human life. COVID-19 and Karoshi both represent the reality that humanity's greatest threats aren't from the world outside ourselves, rather from our own political and economic systems. We've now reached a point where the political mechanisms we've set up to protect ourselves are the very thing that we need protection from. So as we reach the end of this week's Big Question Spotlight, I want us to ponder one more question. What can we do to change this? Now that we've seen our political establishment's indifference to human life, we should ask ourselves what can change. These necessary changes might seem radical at first, but we need to keep in mind today's big question. Is it our duty to sacrifice the people for economic growth? If you don't believe that it is, then change is necessary.